There's been a strange epidemic lately going amongst the folk, so that many in their madness began dancing, which they kept up day and night without interruption, until they fell unconscious. Many have died of it. All of what I just said is according to the city records of Strasbourg, which in present day is located in France. We've all learned about plagues in history. One type of plague that I don't remember learning about is the dancing plague, specifically the dancing plague of 1518. It was not the only one of its kind, however, it was the best recording of a dancing plague. It started with one woman and would claim approximately 400 victims, leaving approximately 100 of those victims dead. Was this some kind of infection or mass hysteria? This is a dancing plague of 1518. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the dancing plague of 1518 if you didn't see the title or the intro. So of course, this video is just for entertainment and educational purposes only. Some of my opinions will be sprinkled in, and I do always encourage everyone to do their own research. So I just wanted to say happy Halloween. It is officially Halloween today. Well, not at the time of filming this, but when this video is going to go up, it's going to be Halloween. So happy Halloween, everyone. This is my favorite holiday of the year, as many of you probably know, and it's the reason why I do the Spooktober series. I was toying with the idea of maybe extending the Spooktober series, so if y'all would be interested in that, leave it in the comment section below, because there are a few more topics that I think I want to cover, but I just haven't decided yet. So if you guys want more, let me know and I will extend it into November. Maybe eventually in the future, I'll make it like a once a month or twice a month type of a deal. I don't know yet, but you guys let me know what you think in the comment section below about that. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the dancing plague. I don't remember where I saw the dancing plague for the first time, or just even just like the topic or whatever, or the subject, but I was so fascinated by it and I wanted to look into it and I just never had a chance to. That's when I decided, well, I'm doing my Spooktober series. Why don't I do the dancing plague as one of the videos for this year? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I was very interested in it especially because a lot of the topics that I have covered in this year's Spooktober series, a lot of them have kind of almost the theories and stuff surrounding them have kind of gone back to mass hysteria. We had the Salem witch trials, the Bridget Bishop and Salem witch trials video. Then we had the Waverly Hills video, which was the tuberculosis sanatorium. And at one point they were talking about the vampire panic, which was, they thought that maybe vampires were coming in the night and they were spreading tuberculosis, which we obviously know that that's not how it spreads. But I just found it so interesting that so many different things throughout history and at different points in history have kind of pointed back to the thought, or I guess I don't really know how to explain it, but it all comes back to possible mass hysteria, and this still happens. It's happened throughout history, and it still happens. So I find that very interesting, and that's why I really truly wanted to go over the dancing plague. Was it mass hysteria? Or was it some kind of infection? Some people may have even thought it was a spider bite. But without further ado, before I keep rambling, because y'all know that I can ramble, let's get into the video. Before we get into the actual dancing plague, I wanted to talk about Strasbourg pre-dancing plague. One source stated that Strasbourg was dealing with many difficult situations. Every European dancing plague that happened between 1374 and 1518 had occurred near Strasbourg, along with the western portion of the Roman Empire. In 1518, they experienced bad harvests, issues with their political climate, and syphilis decided to rear its ugly head. Strasbourg was originally founded by the Romans in 12 BC and then was conquered by Louis XIV in 1681. The city changed nationalities 4 times between 1870 and 1945, but in present day, Strasbourg is located in France. In 1332, there was a revolution and Strasbourg would declare itself a free republic. A little over a decade later, in 1348, the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Plague, would hit the city of Strasbourg. The bubonic plague actually killed over 20 million people in Europe, which was almost a third of the continent's population at the time. A year after the bubonic plague made its appearance in Strasbourg, over 1,000 Jewish people were publicly burnt to death, and the remainder of the Jewish population had been expelled from the city. This was known as the Strasbourg Massacre. There were allegations made against them such as host desecration, blood libel, and deicide. Up until the 18th century, Jewish people were forbidden to stay in Strasbourg after they heard a specific horn that was sounded by the municipal herald. There was a special tax for any horse that a Jewish person would ride into the city with. I'm really sad and disappointed to say that I did not know about this, nor did I ever learn about this in school. If we fast forward to 1439, the Strasbourg Cathedral was built. It became the world's tallest building at the time. In July of 1518, after already dealing with so many issues in addition to what I already mentioned about bad harvests, the political climate, and syphilis, Strasbourg would now have to deal with the dancing plague. At this point in time, Strasbourg was part of the Holy Roman Empire. A woman by the name of Frau Trophäa started to dance on July 14th, 1518. The strange thing was there was no music playing, and it didn't look like she was happy to be dancing. She actually looked to be very uncomfortable and in pain. She only stopped dancing so she could sleep, but as soon as she woke up, she was back to dancing again. On the third day, other people who had been watching her started to believe that maybe this was due to restless spirits or even demons. I'll go over theories later in this video as to what caused a dancing plague or what could have caused a dancing plague, but some have theorized that maybe Frau Trophäa started dancing because of all of what happened in Strasbourg, along with possibly having to deal with something such as DV going on with her husband. A few days of dancing turned into a week, and then all of a sudden, more townspeople joined in on the dancing. However, Frau Trophäa was taken away by the church by the 7th day of her dancing. By this point, about 30 people had started dancing in the streets of Strasbourg as well. These new dancers also looked like they did not want to dance. They were in pain, and one source stated, quote, "It is reported that their heels bled copiously, probably with sinews torn to the bone," end quote. The dancing epidemic would claim approximately 400 victims by August. Physicians at the time blamed this dancing on hot blood, and they theorized that maybe the townspeople were trying to dance their fever away. At one point, a stage was built and professional dancers came to Strasbourg. The town even had a band playing music for the dancing townspeople. There were even people hired to keep the dancers dancing to help shake off their sickness. They thought that if people continued dancing, it would eventually make them stop. However, people would start collapsing. Some people died from heart attacks and strokes. Sadly, due to them dancing, they were exhausted. They rarely stopped to eat, drink, or rest, and it was an unusually hot summer. Some believe that this had to be some kind of holy wrath due to these people sinning. Due to all of this, dancing and music was banned. This dancing plague didn't end until that September. It ended because the dancers were brought to a mountaintop to pray for absolution, as one source states. The way that they did this was when the dancers were brought to the St. Vitus shrine, their feet were placed in red shoes, and the red color was supposed to represent St. Vitus and his burning feet. They believed this would maybe stop them from dancing and protect the people who wore these red shoes. Because this dancing plague was so strange and odd, the people of Strasbourg made sure to record the details of it both in Latin and High German, according to one source. Before we get into other dancing plagues and their similarities, I wanted to talk about some theories as to why the dancing plague could have happened. Dancing mania is derived from the term choreomania, which is also known as the dancing plague. This particular term was coined by Paracelsus. It was believed that dancing mania was a curse sent by a saint, which was usually Saint John the Baptist or Saint Vitus. which is why sometimes it can also be referred to as St. John's dance or St. Vitus's dance. Usually victims of these dancing manias would pray to one of the saints in hopes that it would end their dancing, due to some thinking it was just because you had sinned. Dancing mania has also been known as epidemic chorea and epidemic dancing. This is a disease of the nervous system and sometimes has been considered a type of epilepsy. As an epileptic myself, I can definitely attest to not having control over your body when you're having a seizure or going through an episode, or however you'd like to word that. The brain is a very, very mysterious thing. Some scientists have stated that dancing mania is a collective mental illness, or what others may call mass hysteria. Now that I've gone over a little bit about dancing mania, let's talk about some theories. There is a theory of people accidentally ingesting ergot, which, if you remember from my Bridget Bishop video, comes from rye. It's a toxic mold that grows in damp rye, and it can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and outbursts, which is what some believe happened to the girls who accused Bridget Bishop and others of witchcraft. Ergot also produces a chemical that's related to LSD. However, historian John Waller is strongly against this theory. He theorized that the dancing was maybe caused by Saint Vitus. This was a Catholic saint, and somehow Europeans in the 16th century believed that he had the power to curse people with a dancing plague. John Waller also believed that in addition to this curse, there was disease and famine, and this could have caused some kind of, again, mass hysteria, which is something I've gone over in 2 of my other Spooktober videos about Bridget Bishop and Waverly Hills, just like I talked about in the intro of this video. With the dancing plague, they also had to deal with a lot of terrible and fatal occurrences. Others have theorized that maybe the people who danced were part of a religious cult. In 1526, Paracelsus visited the city of Strasbourg. He believed that Frau Trofeo was trying to humiliate her husband. One source stated that this was pretty on brand for him, since he usually leaned towards misogyny and skepticism. He believed that the other women did the same thing just to imitate one another. This was out of some kind of sexual frustration, and the women did it in unity. Other historians believe that the dancing plague could have been due to epilepsy and tarantism, which is the bite of a tarantula. What some have agreed upon when it comes to theories is psychogenic illness due to the hard times that the people of Strasbourg had gone through. This is pretty much just the medical term or more official term for mass hysteria. Before Strasbourg's dancing plague, there were several other cases of dancing plagues close to Strasbourg. Because of the printing press and through word of mouth, it's more than likely that the townspeople of Strasbourg knew about these other events. The townspeople could have been subconsciously reenacting what they heard about. John Waller did also mention that maybe this could have been due to some kind of supernaturalism. The townspeople kept having their preachers tell them about them being sinners and how everything was their fault, so maybe they were just looking for something that would explain all of this. The dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg wasn't the only type of dancing plague. Similar dancing manias also happened in Switzerland, Germany, and Holland. However, very few were as large and fatal as the one in 1518. The first known outbreak of a dancing mania happened in the 7th century, and then in the 1020s in Bernburg, 18 people began singing and dancing around a church during a Christmas Eve service. These dancing manias happened many times throughout Europe until about the 17th century. Out of nowhere, it all just stopped. Other outbreaks happened during the 13th century, one of them being in 1237. A large group of children had traveled from Erfurt to Arnstadt. I'm going to try my best to pronounce these names as well as I can, so I'm so sorry if I butcher them. But anyway, they were jumping and dancing the entire way. The distance between the two areas was about 12 miles or 20 kilometers. Around this time, the legend of Pied Piper had also originated. If you aren't familiar with this legend, it dates back to the Middle Ages. It was said that there was a piper who was dressed in multicolored clothes and was a rat catcher. This piper had been hired to lure the town's rats away with his magic pipe. Supposedly, the townspeople didn't want to pay for his services as promised, and he began using his magic pipe to lure the children away, just like he did with the rats on St. John and Paul's Day while the parents were in church. Which I find kind of odd, because wouldn't parents take their children to church with them? Or maybe it just wasn't like that back then. It was said that 150 children followed him into a cave, never to be seen again. Only 3 children remained in the town, and it was because one couldn't follow the magic pipe as quickly as the other children. The second was vision impaired, so they couldn't see where they were going in order to follow the piper. And the third was hearing impaired, which meant that the child couldn't hear the music of the magic pipe. Some versions say that the children were taken to different areas, or that they were returned once the piper received his money. Back to dancing mania, though. There was another dancing mania in 1278. There were about 200 people who were dancing on a bridge over the River Meuse, and due to all of these people dancing, the bridge collapsed. Many of the survivors of this particular incident were brought to a chapel that was dedicated to Saint Vitus, and they were cured. If we fast forward to 1373 and 1374, the first major dancing mania happened, and it was reported that it took place in England, Germany, and the Netherlands. One of the biggest outbreaks was in Aachen on June 24, 1374. This occurred before it spread to other places such as Cologne, Flanders, Franconia, Hainaut, Metz, Strasbourg, Tongeren, Utrecht, and other places such as Luxembourg and Italy. In 1381, within the town of Augsburg, there was yet another outbreak. Strasbourg actually had an outbreak in 1418 that resulted in fasting for days, and it caused exhaustion. Schaffhausen experienced an outbreak in 1428. A monk danced to death, and then within the same year in Zurich, a group of women reportedly danced in a frenzy. After the dancing plague of 1518, there were more incidents. One was in 1536 in Basel that involved a group of children, and another in 1551 in Anhalt that only involved one man. In the 17th century, there were more incidents, and a professor of medicine by the name of Gregor Horst stated, quote, "Several women who annually visit the chapel of St. Vitus in Dreffelhausen dance madly all day and all night until they collapse in ecstasy. In this way, they come to themselves again and feel little or nothing until the next May, when they are again forced around St. Vitus's day to betake themselves to that place. One of these women is said to have danced every year for the past 20 years, another for a full 32, end quote. With all of that said, it seems that these dancing manias just stopped by the mid-17th century. In addition to dancing manias, there is also something else I found while reading about the dancing plague of 1518. There was a laughter epidemic in 1962 in Tanganyika. There were almost 1,000 people who broke out in uncontrollable laughter. 3 girls at a boarding school in Kashasha, Tanzania, is where it started. Within a few hours, 95 out of 159 students had also started laughing. As you can imagine, once the students went home, the uncontrollable laughter spread to their families and villages. This went on for 18 months. The theory behind this was a result of stress. I've gone over the dancing plague of 1518 in addition to theories surrounding that plague, along with talking about other types of dancing manias. In this section, I want to go over more theories as to why these dancing manias happened besides just focusing on the one of 1518. While the dancing manias all differed, what has been recorded has shown that these dancing manias occur when there is something terrible going on. In some modern literature, it shows that women are usually the ones dancing. However, we know that that's not the case. Men have been part of dancing manias as well. There has been a constant debate on whether or not the dancing was organized or unorganized. Whether or not it's planned or not, the dancers seem to experience uncontrollable movements and unconsciousness. Robert Bartholomew has researched these types of dancing manias, and he stated that the dancers did not reside where the dancing took place, and the dancing would travel from place to place. I'd like to challenge this though, because from what I've read about the dancing plague of 1518, these people seem to have all been residents of Strasbourg. The only way that I can see this being correct is by the townspeople hearing about other people dancing in neighboring towns or cities. Hearing about such a thing could maybe spark some kind of chain reaction, but it started with Frau Trophäa, and from what it seems, she was a Strasbourg resident. Robert also stated that the dancers wore strange and colorful attire and held wooden sticks. In addition, he stated that the people paraded around naked and made obscene gestures. Some even had sexual intercourse or acted like animals. Something that I found interesting that Robert talked about was that the participants had a weird reaction to the color red. It's almost as if they could not stand the color and became violent when they saw this particular color. Did this connection have something to do with the red shoes that the townspeople of Strasbourg ended up wearing to stop the dancing, or is this just something Robert theorized? Some have stated that these dancing manias ended in a variety of horrible things such as chest pains, convulsions, hallucinations, hyperventilation, exhaustion, and more, while others have stated that the dancers ended up in a state of ecstasy. Something that I did mention a little bit earlier very briefly was tarantism. In Italy, another phenomenon had occurred which was called tarantism. This is when victims were said to have been poisoned by a tarantula or a scorpion. The earliest outbreak that we know of was in the 13th century. At that time, the only cure was to dance in order to get the venom out of the person's blood. This only occurred in the summertime. Sometimes, other people would join in on the dancing because they believed that their old bites were reactivated by the heat or just by the music. The people would perform a tarantella, which was accompanied by music that was said to cure the victim. Some of the affected would also whip each other or pretend to sword fight and drink lots of wine along with jumping into the sea. Somehow this was said to also help fight off tarantism. A few minutes ago I mentioned how the people of the dancing manias did not like the color red. With tarantism, the people didn't like black, and women were reported to be the most affected. Tarantism was said to be common up until the 17th century, and then out of nowhere it just stopped. They only had very small outbreaks until 1959. A religious history professor by the name of Ernesto Di Martino studied tarantism in 1959. He found that many cases of tarantism probably didn't even have any relation to spider bites. Many people believe that even though they hadn't been bitten, they may have come in contact with someone who had, or that they just touched a spider. The result of this was a mass panic, and the way that people dealt with tarantism were not normal behaviors at the time, sometimes even prohibited behaviors. So even though tarantism and dancing manias are two separate phenomena, they had many similarities. In my opinion, it seems like tarantism had more to do with superstition with the added mass hysteria aspect of it, whereas dancing manias had more to do with a spiritual or religious superstition with a little bit of mass hysteria. So it's pretty much, in my opinion, it's pretty much the same thing, but one is just a regular superstition, the other one is superstition based on religious beliefs and stuff like that. I can definitely see how the two are very similar. Whether the dancing plague of 1518 was the result of mass hysteria or some kind of infection, it's still interesting to read about. It's even more interesting to find out that it wasn't the only one of its kind. This has happened throughout history, and if we want to consider this mass hysteria, it still continues to happen. If we look at a couple of the topics I covered in the Spooktober series this time around, mass hysteria and ergot have popped up on more than one occasion. I'm sure it's happened even more in history as well. I do empathize with the people who had become victims of it though, because in their minds, they truly thought they had no control over their bodies. Some danced until they were severely injured, while others died. Maybe we'll never know the true cause of these dancing plagues, but hopefully, history doesn't repeat itself.